Dad said with his arm over his shoulder. That ought to give you kids plenty of room to play. Better go get cleaned up. It's Thanksgiving, bub. Company's coming soon. And his dad walked up the stairs, not knowing he'd just burst his boy's bubble. Kids, Norman thought. It's always you kids. I'm 12 going on 13. They're kids. I'm Norman. Norman, of course, was overreacting to something his dad said, but that's well within the rights of a 12-year-old boy to do, and besides, it was supported by the Thanksgiving history of the family. Thanksgiving in the Tuttle household was an overrated and predictable affair to Norman's way of thinking. It was always the same thing year after year for as long as he could remember. Grandma and Grandpa Tuttle always came, which was no occasion because they lived in town and they saw him almost every day anyway. The only difference was that Grandma wore her Thanksgiving dress and Grandpa wore his tie. Same dress, same tie, every year. "What a pretty dress, Mom," Norman's mom would always say at the door, and "Pop, don't you look dashing today," to Grandpa. Same lines, every year. And Grandpa would always have in his hand a bottle of wine. Thanksgiving was the only time Norman ever saw alcohol of any kind in the house. All Norman knew was that it was for the Thanksgiving toast that his dad made every year. Well, then Uncle Stu and Aunt Sissy would show up. Uncle Stu was his dad's brother and fishing partner, and Norman saw him every day too, but he never saw Aunt Sissy much. Aunt Sissy was a pain in the pants, and everybody knew it, including Uncle Stu and possibly yourself, because she was never around much. All Aunt Sissy did was talk, and she never said anything. The first thing she always said to Norman was, "My, look at you, how you've grown into such a little man." Norman had been growing into Aunt Sissy's little man for 8 years that he could remember, and possibly longer because she's saying the same thing to Norman's youngest brother, who was only 2. She'd go on and on about almost anything that came to mind without taking a breath, and it didn't seem to matter if anybody paid any attention to her or not, and they usually didn't. She just liked to listen to herself, a lot more than anybody else did. On top of Aunt Sissy and Uncle Stu, Grandma and Grandpa, always came Uncle Elmer and Aunt Edna. They were okay, Norman thought, and they didn't see them much because they lived across the state. What Norman dreaded about the arrival of Elmer and Edna was the 5 kids they brought with them. The whole chemistry of the house changed when they poured in the door. Norman's mother would turn into a staff sergeant and start barking orders. "Shoes off, everybody. Norman, put the coats in the bedroom. Has everyone said hello to Grandma and Grandpa? Norman, I said put away the coats." Everyone would be in the kitchen for a while, saying hello while babies crawled around people's feet, toddlers cried, and everybody talked at once over Aunt Sissy. The adults would allow this cacophony to continue for an appropriate time, and then Norman's mom would finally issue the order that he'd come to despise. "Okay, kids, we need room in here. Everybody down to the basement to play until dinner." And that would be it. They'd all go downstairs and invent games or watch television and generally be just kids. There'd be no more contact with the grown-ups for the rest of the day. When dinner was ready, they'd be set up at card tables in the other room so that the adults could enjoy their meal, and told to hush when it came time for the toast, which was always a long, drawn-out thing, thanking the Lord for good fishing or good health, good food, or whatever. When they were done, Norman and the rest of the kids would be sent either outside to play or back into the basement. The adults would adjourn to the living room to talk in low tones about important things that Norman had no inkling of. Norman wasn't sure he belonged in the living room, but he knew he didn't belong in the basement. All his cousins, like his brothers and sisters, were younger than him. It used to be okay, but somewhere along the line, hide-and-seek, cooties, and crazy eights had lost their luster for Norman. He was a commercial fisherman, sort of, and he beat his dad at cribbage. That should be worth something to somebody, but at the age of 12, going on 13, there are a lot of should-bes and too few.